Previously on Battle 360. The last great carrier battle ended in disaster for the Japanese. But the enemy is still formidable and still has a trick up his sleeve. The imposing Japanese surface fleet is steaming headlong toward American forces in Leyte Gulf. USS Enterprise, a fighting city of steel. She is the most revered and decorated ship of World War II. On this 360-degree battlefield, where threats loom on the seas, in the skies, and in the ocean depths, the Enterprise's enemies could be anywhere and everywhere. There's nowhere to run when the battle's all around you. Battle 360, USS Enterprise, Battle of Leyte Gulf. This series is brought to you with limited commercials by the men and women of Enterprise Rent-A-Car. Daybreak, October 24th, 1944. Philippine Sea. "12 scout bombers and 16 Hellcat fighters launch from USS Enterprise. Their mission: search the waters southwest of Leyte Gulf. Word has it the Japanese warships are headed for American forces landing on Leyte Island. The warships are likely to include Japan's 2 super battleships, Musashi and Yamato, the biggest in the world. And Enterprise bombers are hoping to destroy them. The bomber pilots are also eager to finally kill the last enemy carrier to take part in the Pearl Harbor attack. The Zuikaku, sister ship Shokaku, recently met her fate at the Battle of the Philippine Sea. At this point, Enterprise and Zuikaku have seen more combat than any other carriers on either side since the opening of the war. Bill Norberg, a 23-year-old captain's yeoman from Massachusetts, has been aboard since those earliest days.
We have some a kind of a checker game going on, I would say, between ourselves and the enemy there. The Shokaku and the Zuikaku were sister ships. We in the Yorktown and we in the Hornet were sister ships. And so many times we met during the war.
Now, at 8 a.m., as Enterprise flyers reach the Sulu Sea, they scan the ocean surface meticulously for enemy vessels. Just over an hour later, 15,000 feet below them, the American search group spots what it's been looking for: a Japanese naval task force. No aircraft carriers or super battleships are present, but the task force does include 2 standard-sized battleships and a heavy cruiser. They are picketed by 4 small destroyers, and they're burning north at 15 knots. There can only be one destination for these ships. They're headed toward the beaches of Leyte to kill Americans. Time to make some war. The Enterprise aircraft immediately line up to dive on the Japanese vessels.
So the plan here is for the dive bombers to get into a position where they can hit these battleships. Japanese battleships are the main targets. Meanwhile, the fighter escorts are going to swoop down and strafe these destroyers and cruisers that are escorting these battleships. That way, the cruisers and destroyers will have their fire divided. They won't be able to take on the attacking bombers quite so well. They'll be distracted by the fighter planes.
The fighters nose toward the water first, slamming their throttles forward. A sheet of murderous flak, anti-aircraft fire, quickly rises to meet them.
These planes encounter very interesting flak coming up from the Japanese fleet. Each ship is firing a different color. So when these flak bursts go off, you have blues and yellows and whites and reds. It's a very interesting scene.
The shells from each enemy ship are marked with a different color dye, so the fire from one ship can be distinguished from the fire of another. Slicing through the heavy flak, the Hellcats blister the cruiser and destroyers with 50 caliber machine gun fire and 5-inch rockets. Seconds behind them, the Enterprise dive bombers, Curtiss Helldivers, scream downward toward the battleships. At 2,000 feet, the Helldivers release their 500-pound bombs. They pull out of their dives just above the water and maneuver to avoid the rainbow-colored flak as they make their getaway. Arthur Kropp is a 19-year-old from Michigan.
Would go right down treetop level or low, as low as we could. Reason for this being anti-aircraft fire would be diminished quickly because you're out of range quicker.
Smoke and fire on the decks of the battleships point to the bomber's success.
There are several near misses, but at least 3 of the bombs do make direct hits. So this battle does get some pretty damaging hits on this Japanese force.
Even so, neither battleship is out of the action, but the injuries will slow them down. But for Commander Fred Bakatis, leader of the Enterprise Hellcats, this has been a battle-ending encounter. Shortly after the attack, he radios that he's losing oil and that he's ditching. Bakatis faces almost certain death. If the impact of the landing doesn't kill him, he'll be stranded, alone in enemy waters and more than 100 miles from land. His comrades are also still at great risk. While they think they've struck a major blow to the enemy attack force, they don't know that a few hundred miles north, a much larger Japanese force that includes the world's biggest battleships is steaming toward the American landing troops at Leyte. And the Japanese have a trick up their sleeve. A deception to lure USS Enterprise and the other big US carriers away from the battle area. And it just might work. By October 1944, the American and Japanese aircraft carrier forces have been slugging it out for 3 years. Midway, Eastern Solomons, Santa Cruz, and now, following the recent clash over the Philippine Sea, in which 400 planes were lost, the enemy's carrier force is a shadow of its former self.
Their carriers at this point are empty. They have vessels, but they don't have planes or pilots to put on those vessels.
Just over 100 planes remain to distribute amongst the surviving carriers. Even so, the Japanese Navy has another skilled and menacing combat arm.
The remaining strength of the Japanese Navy at this point is in its battleships and its heavy cruisers. They still have a very formidable array of heavy gun warships that they can bring to bear.
Among the warships are Japan's 2 super battleships. The monsters Musashi and Yamato. The biggest battleships ever built.
They were massive battleships. 863 feet long, 172-foot beam, weighing 72,000 tons. The Yamato and the Musashi both had a main battery of 9 460-millimeter guns. That's 18.1 inches. The largest naval guns used in combat.
They're extremely heavily armored, yet relatively fast, very powerful, graceful warships. And they're able to sustain a level of punishment that was considered inconceivable even at the beginning of the war.
Japanese admirals must now rely on these large surface warships to stop the American advance through the Pacific. They believe the best way to do it is to disrupt the American beach landings.
It's recognized at this point in the war that it's important to hit the American invasion forces. So the point of attack for the Japanese battleships for the first time is not their American opposite numbers, but is rather the beachhead itself and the transports and the logistical apparatus that are supporting this invasion.
On the opposite side of the equation, the American carrier forces are holding their own, so far. They still have plenty of carriers and aircraft. U.S. admirals also have battleships and cruisers at their disposal. They feel they have enough strength at this point in the war to finally target the Philippines. Taking the Philippines will place U.S. forces between Japan and its Navy's oil supply in Indonesia. But any attempted landing in the Philippines will be hotly contested. Japanese occupiers will defend this crucial ground to the death. The American strategy for taking back the Philippines calls first for the capture of the centrally located island of Leyte.
It's felt that Leyte needs to be captured so that we can put air bases into operation. And then we'll extend our air umbrella over further portions of the Philippines and go on eventually to the liberation of Luzon, which contains the capital of Manila.
The U.S. Navy will use 2 separate fleets to accomplish this. The actual landing force, U.S. Army troops, will be delivered by the U.S. 7th Fleet under Vice Admiral Thomas Kinkaid. Kinkaid is a tough-minded New Hampshire man with extensive battleship command experience. The 7th Fleet's transports and warships will both land the troops and provide them with support. Close air support will come from small aircraft carriers called escort or jeep carriers. The small carriers will also keep planes aloft to protect the other vessels of the invasion fleet. Aging battleships, ones that were sunk at Pearl Harbor, then raised and refurbished, will bombard the beaches ahead of the landings.
The other fleet in this operation is the U.S. Third Fleet under the command of William F. Halsey. Now, Admiral Bull Halsey is sort of this patron figure with U.S. carriers and U.S. carrier aviation. It was Halsey that had led Enterprise's task force into all of those early campaigns in the first months of World War II.
Halsey's Third Fleet includes the now legendary Enterprise, along with 17 other large, fast carriers. Halsey and his Third Fleet will remain farther out at sea to provide additional cover and support for the Leyte landing operation. If the Japanese fleet shows itself, the famous carrier admiral will attempt to pummel it before it gets a chance to disrupt the Philippine landing. But the Japanese have devised a strategy for countering Halsey's presence. Executed properly, they believe their plan will crush the Americans in Leyte Gulf.
In the wake of their massive defeat in the Marianas Campaign, in the battle known as the Turkey Shoot, the Japanese fleet is, well, they're spread out. The main carrier fleet is refurbishing back in the home islands. They need new planes. They have lost hundreds of naval aviators and warplanes in the battle that summer. So the carriers, the fleet carriers, are back in the home islands. And the battleships and cruisers and the remainder of the surface fleet are hundreds of miles to the south.
A number of their warships are at this point sequestered in places near Singapore because there's oil there, and they need oil to operate.
But Japanese admirals plan to use these circumstances to their advantage. While their empty carrier force can't accomplish much as a fighting entity, it has great potential as a distraction. The Japanese will use the carrier force as a decoy. The carriers will sail south from Japan as though they plan to threaten the Leyte operation. The hope is that Admiral Halsey, always eager to sink Japanese carriers, will steam north to intercept them, pulling America's big carriers out of the primary battle area. Simultaneously, the enemy's main effort will come from the south. Japan's battleships and cruisers will steam north toward Leyte from Singapore. The warships will split into two groups, one force sailing through the Sulu Sea and Surigao Strait and approaching Leyte Gulf from the south. The other half sailing through the Sibuyan Sea and San Bernardino Strait and coming down on Leyte from the north.
They have a southern and a northern pincer composed of battleships and cruisers that will hopefully meet up off of the island of Leyte and there crush the invasion convoys.
When Japanese and American forces collide, the numbers of ships involved and the hundreds of miles separating major battle areas will distinguish the struggle for Leyte Gulf as the largest naval battle in the history of mankind. Now, on the morning of October 24th, 1944, the American landing on the island of Leyte has been underway for 4 days. Resistance from Japanese ground forces on Leyte has been minimal, due in large part to bombardment by 7th Fleet battleships. 25-year-old Oregonian Ken Peck is a gunnery officer.
Every time there was a new operation, you'd soften them up for a while with bombings, and then you'd hit them. And they softened that up for a long time. So when they landed at Leyte, I don't think it was too much interference or too much opposition.
Japanese naval forces are rushing toward Leyte to stop them. As men and equipment flow ashore, 60 miles off the eastern coast of Leyte, William F. Halsey's Third Fleet, including USS Enterprise, has been sending out search planes, like the 28 planes sent toward the Sulu Sea this morning, to keep an eye out for approaching warships. Richard Hart, also a gunnery officer, hails from West Virginia.
We knew the Japanese fleet had left its anchorage, and we had submarines out who did a very good job in keeping track of it, giving us advance warnings.
Indeed, 25 hours ago, American submarines USS Darter and USS Dace launched torpedoes at the Japanese center force.
These subs are scouting off the southern tip of Palawan. And they managed to actually hit and sink 2 heavy cruisers.
Since this contact, Admiral Halsey has stepped up scouting flights from Enterprise and her sister carriers. The flight that headed south of Enterprise this morning, led by Commanders Emmett Riera and Fred Bakatus, discovered the Japanese Southern Force, one half of the intended pincer action against Leyte. The Southern Force is under the command of Vice Admiral Shoji Nishimura. 55-year-old Nishimura ably commanded the 7th Cruiser Division in the Guadalcanal campaign, bombarding Henderson Field and inflicting heavy damage. Now, thanks to Riera's Helldivers, 2 of the battleships of the Southern Force are wounded. The Curtiss SB-2C Helldiver is a fearsome attack aircraft. Its impressive top speed of 294 miles per hour is made possible in part by its internal bomb bay. Carrying large bombs internally prevents wind drag. The bomber is armed with 2 20-millimeter wing-mounted cannons and 2 30-caliber machine guns in the rear cockpit. And while the hits Riera's Helldivers have scored on the Southern Force battleships have resulted in fires, the flames are quickly extinguished, and neither warship is out of the action. The Hellcat fighters have made rocket hits on the cruiser and the destroyers, but damage is minimal, and those vessels also remain on course. Commander Fred Bakatus's Hellcat, on the other hand, has become a casualty. And shortly after radioing that he's losing oil and that he's ditching, his plane tears into the water. Bakatus is lucky and survives the impact. He scrambles out of his aircraft just as it begins to sink.
Bakatus is able to survive his water landing. He's able to deploy his tiny life raft. More importantly, his friend, Emmett Riera, who is in command of the Helldivers, is able to get into a position where he can drop Bakatus a larger life raft.
Commander Riera carefully plots Bakatus's position before leading the Enterprise planes back to the mothership. Meanwhile, 300 miles northwest, in the Sibuyan Sea, the Japanese center force is also steaming toward Leyte. This force comprises 5 battleships, 7 heavy cruisers, 1 light cruiser, and 13 destroyers. And it's with this attack fleet that the monster battleships Yamato and Musashi are present. Both vessels pack 18.1-inch guns and are designed to sustain a staggering level of punishment. These ships represent the heart of the enemy's main effort. Spotted by scout planes earlier. Now, at 10:30 a.m., the center force comes under attack from American bombers. They are aircraft from 2 other carriers in Admiral Halsey's task force. USS Intrepid and USS Cabot.
Helldivers and Avenger torpedo planes from USS Intrepid and USS Cabot swoop into this Japanese task force. They score hits on a cruiser and 3 battleships, including the mega battleships Yamato and Musashi.
The monster warships absorb the hits in stride and maintain speed. A second wave of planes from Intrepid, along with aircraft from USS Essex and USS Lexington, soon arrives and concentrates its attack on Musashi. The gutsy pilots brave a sky torn with flak. American bombers score 10 additional hits. Musashi feels it this time.
They get bomb hits and torpedo hits on the Musashi that weaken it and slow it down.
When the smoke clears, Musashi is listing to port and struggling to make 15 knots. And the monster warship's troubles are far from over. A few hours later, in mid-afternoon, USS Enterprise pilots get a crack at her. A wave of bombers from both Enterprise and USS Franklin buzzes in, determined to put Musashi beneath the waves.
As our dive bomber and torpedo bomber pilots came in, they could see the fattest target they had ever seen, and they wanted to take her down.
The bomber pilots hold their dives longer than they normally would have. They press in very close before releasing. Tactic is successful.
Every one of their torpedoes hit, all 8 of them. 11 out of their 18 bombs hit their mark. Both squadrons turn and pull away. The Musashi is stopped, down by the head, and burning.
So the Enterprise Air Group participates in the final destruction of one of the two most powerful battleships in the entire world.
Musashi will finally slip beneath the ocean surface shortly after dark, but she has lived up to the estimates of her toughness.
The Americans were absolutely astounded at the amount of damage that she took before she finally rolled over and sank.
The tenacious attacks by American aircraft rattled the Japanese commander, Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita, and he turns his fleet around, if only temporarily. He's been so heavily engaged by wave after wave of American bombers, he attempts to withdraw beyond the range of the U.S. carriers.
To the Americans, it looks as if that force has been beaten off and is going to be retreating.
It leads Admiral Halsey, commanding the 3rd U.S. Fleet, to the conclusion that Kurita has disengaged and is leaving the battle area.
Admiral Halsey believes he is now free to turn the attention of his carrier force elsewhere. But the Admiral's shift of focus is premature.
During the later afternoon, Admiral Kurita then brings his forces about again, and under cover of darkness, brings those forces through the San Bernardino Strait.
But well before the center force reverses course for the second time, scout planes notify Admiral Halsey that Japanese aircraft carriers are approaching from the north. They're headed south toward the Philippines from mainland Japan. The Admiral doesn't know the enemy carriers represent literally an empty threat. He doesn't know they're acting as a decoy, meant to pull him away from the main fight. Admiral William Halsey, whose personal motto is hit hard, hit fast, hit often, takes the bait. Marine anti-aircraft gunner Jack Maroney is a 20-year-old from Texas.
And of course, it was a poorly kept secret that Halsey would like to eliminate every Japanese carrier, and he possibly could. And so that makes sense, but he headed north, trying to eliminate the Jap fleet.
21-year-old fellow crewman Pedro Sandoval also hails from Texas.
We made a big mistake then because we left the other ships unprotected.
Halsey's action leaves the San Bernardino Strait, the path the Japanese center force will eventually take to Leyte Gulf, unguarded. It could mean the destruction of the entire 7th Fleet. But since the Admiral believes the center force is retreating and that the carriers represent the main threat, he's comfortable with the decision. October 24th, 1944, 10:30 p.m. The Japanese Southern Force, the force attacked by Enterprise planes early this morning, has now churned its way out of the Sulu Sea and into Surigao Strait. Surigao Strait empties into the southern end of Leyte Gulf. But fortunately for American landing forces, this avenue of potential attack is covered. Just beyond the mouth of the strait, under the steady command of Rear Admiral Jesse Oldendorf, are 6 American battleships and 8 Allied cruisers.
So these battleships under Oldendorf's command are not necessarily state-of-the-art. Compared to the new Iowa-class battleships, which are now fighting in the Pacific, these are battleships that were sunk or damaged at Pearl Harbor, the Maryland, the California. And fittingly, these ships that the Japanese had tried to put under at Pearl Harbor are now back to fight at Leyte and return the favor.
The refurbished warships are here to both provide beach bombardment for the Leyte landing force, the U.S. 6th Army, and to protect the landing force against naval attack from the south. An attack of the type the Japanese Southern Force hopes to bring in just a matter of hours. But they must first get past Jesse Oldendorf's battleships. And Oldendorf knows they're coming. The Admiral gets an early warning of the enemy's approach. From PT boats he's sent deep into the strait for this purpose. When word of the oncoming Japanese vessels reaches him, Ollendorf immediately deploys his big warships for an epic fight.
So Ollendorf arrays his battleships into a battle line, and he is going to execute a very classic maneuver called crossing the T. The column of enemy ships are going to be intersected by his warships. This way, all of the battleships under Ollendorf's command will be able to fire full broadsides, concentrate their fire on this single column of ships.
It's an ideal defensive position. At 3:51 a.m., radar-controlled guns on the American battleships open fire. Firing from ships on both sides rages for over an hour, but the Americans prevail.
They sink 2 Japanese battleships there, along with a heavy cruiser and a number of destroyers.
The Southern Force commander, Vice Admiral Shoji Nishimura, goes down with his flagship, Yamashiro.
So the Southern pincer is destroyed utterly, without any real accomplishments.
It is the last battle line action in history. Battleships will never again square off gun to gun. As the glow of sunlight gradually brightens the horizon, 500 miles north of Surigao Strait, USS Enterprise and the Third Fleet prepare for a battle of their own. The decoy of empty Japanese carriers has reached the waters off Cape Engano, the northeast tip of the main Philippine island of Luzon. Ironically, the meaning of the Spanish word Engano is deceit or delusion. October 25th, 6 a.m. Admiral William Halsey's Third Fleet launches scout planes to search for the enemy's aircraft carriers. Other bombers and fighters also take to the air to be ready to attack at a moment's notice. At 7:15 a.m., just over an hour after launch, the scouts report contact. They've spotted the enemy's northern force. At the heart of this fleet are 4 aircraft carriers, 1 full-size flat-top, and 3 light carriers.
They had just a few planes on them, but they were supposed to be the cheese in the trap.
Escorting the carriers are 2 aging battleships, 3 light cruisers, and 9 destroyers. The vessel of most interest to Admiral Halsey is the full-size flat-top. It's the Zuikaku, the sole remaining carrier from the Pearl Harbor Strike Force.
Zuikaku and her sister ship Shokaku were the 2 carriers that he most wanted to sink. Shokaku, of course, had been destroyed at Philippine Sea.
The Third Fleet bombers waste no time commencing the attack. Wave after wave of American fighters and bombers pour lead and explosives into the Japanese carrier force. Zuikaku comes under attack by bombers from USS Lexington, Essex, and Langley. They drill 7 torpedoes into the hull of the big carrier and plant 9 bombs on her deck. At the same time, 3 miles away and 10,000 feet above the fight, dive bombers from USS Enterprise turn their attention to the light carrier Zuiho.
The dive bombers and the torpedo bombers pressed so hard and so close to Zuiho that it was hard for them to even miss their targets. So they dropped their torpedoes and their bombs. They stopped the Zuiho dead in its tracks, and it was on fire.
But close by, the guns of battleship Issei are still blasting out murderous fire. Battle of Leyte Gulf. Japanese light carrier Zuiho is battered, in flames, and no longer a threat in the battle off Cape Engano. With Zuiho dead in the water, an Avenger torpedo bomber from Enterprise is quickly diverted to another target, the battleship Issei. The Japanese battleship Issei is actually a hybrid, a battleship aircraft carrier. As a result of heavy aircraft carrier losses earlier in the war, the Japanese Navy converted Issei into a half carrier by replacing the rear gun turrets with a short flight deck. Issei can carry up to 22 aircraft but still retains the firepower of her 8 14-inch guns. The Avenger, redirected toward Issei, is piloted by Ensign Mike Krause. And down below, in the well of the plane, is radio man bombardier Arthur Kropp. The Avenger buzzes toward the battleship through a tremendous volume of anti-aircraft fire. Multicolored flak explodes all around the American bomber. Despite the danger, Mike Krause keeps his eye on the battleship, and Arthur Kropp keeps his nose in the radar scope, calling the range to the target. But one of the explosions is a little too close for comfort.
We took a hit under our tail. The window right by my head broke out, and Mike, he recovered. And I thought, boy, I got hit for sure. I felt something trickling down the back of my neck. I said, uh-oh.
Still, the determined crew keeps their focus on the mission.
I kept calling the range for him, so we went on down, made our run, and I watched our torpedo hit good.
As the Avenger pulls away, Arthur Kropp gets a chance to check his wound.
As it turned out, all it was is some bilge water that trickled down, so I was okay. Didn't get hit. It must have been a big shell went under us, whatever it was. And a piece of shrapnel probably busted out the window. That's all I can say.
The Avenger's route out of the battle area takes it over the sinking aircraft carrier Zuikaku. The carrier's deck is filled with Japanese sailors.
Mike slowed down, almost stall speed, went right over the top of that carrier. And the Japanese were shaking their swords at us and their fists and that. And for whatever reason, I don't know, I just gave them the finger as I went by.
The Zuikaku has been responsible for the deaths of many Americans, and U.S. bomber crews in the battle off Cape Engano are ecstatic to finally see it listing, minutes away from disappearing beneath the waves.
The original Pearl Harbor strike force has now been utterly destroyed, and Pearl Harbor has been avenged.
But the satisfaction of seeing Zuikaku meet its end is suddenly tempered by word of a potential calamity back in Leyte Gulf.
We're mixing it up with the carriers when we suddenly heard that the center group had turned around and come back.
While William Halsey's Third Fleet has been pummeling the Japanese carriers off Cape Engano, the American landing forces in Leyte Gulf have been caught completely off guard. Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita's center force, the force Halsey thought was retreating, in fact turned around, sailed all night through the San Bernardino Strait, entered the Philippine Sea, and steamed south toward Leyte Gulf early this morning. With Halsey's Third Fleet well north sinking carriers, Kurita reached the Gulf unopposed and is now bearing down on the American landing forces. There are no American battleships in this part of the Gulf. The only American vessels present are several small escort or jeep carriers, along with the destroyers that escort them. Displacing 7,800 tons, a typical escort carrier is 512 feet in length and 65 feet in width. With a speed of 19 knots, the vessel can transport up to 28 aircraft. Crew size is typically 860 men, and most escort carriers defend themselves against air attack with 5-inch guns.
When the sun rises, the American jeep carriers begin their morning routine of getting aircraft ready to go for support runs for the American troops, and are surprised and horrified to see a large force of Japanese warships appear on the horizon and begin to close with them rapidly.
20 miles northwest, Avenger pilot Ensign Bill Brooks reports that the enemy is a mere 10 miles north of the American landing force.
Their commander says there's no way that they're here. And Ensign Brooks says, oh, yes it is. I can see the meatballs on the flags.
7th Fleet's battleships are too far south to lend immediate aid. And the destroyers and carriers simply don't have adequate firepower.
They are hopelessly outgunned. There's no weapon larger than a 5-inch gun on any of the American ships in the area. And on the Japanese side, you have battleship Yamato, which is armed with 18.1-inch guns, the largest naval rifles ever installed afloat. They have a second battleship. They have numerous heavy cruisers. This is a mismatch of mythic proportions.
But the commander of one of the small destroyers chooses to stand and make the best showing he can, despite the odds. Lieutenant Commander Ernest E. Evans, commanding the destroyer USS Johnston, determines to charge the enemy.
He had two choices. He could flight or fight. But what he did is he turned his ship and he actually went and he attacked his Japanese armada.
Which is an act of bravery which almost beggars the imagination.
American destroyers have 5-inch guns, but they also have torpedoes, which is the weapon Evans hopes to bring to bear. Unfortunately, the range of the torpedoes is only 5 miles, half as far as the Japanese force on the horizon.
He had to close his distance. He was at about 10 miles, and he had to get within 5 miles for his torpedoes to be effective, because they were only effective for 5 miles.
Evans orders his little vessel to speed toward the vastly superior Japanese force. He knows the enemy's guns will be firing on him, but he plans to weave to try to avoid the killing rounds. And if he gets close enough, he might just score a lucky hit. Evans's bold charge inspires other commanders around him, and soon many destroyers join the attack.
They go after the Japanese with both gunfire and torpedoes. They're laying smoke screens to try to screen the escort carriers as they're trying to dawdle their way out at 17 or 18 knots.
The escort carriers are also firing their 5-inch guns as they scramble to get dozens of attack planes into the air and avoid being hit by the enemy. The escort carrier planes are Avenger torpedo bombers and Wildcats. The Wildcat is the older fighter, but it can still pack a punch.
The Americans very quickly managed to get hundreds of these airplanes up in the air, doing something in the way of harassing the Japanese fleet.
Out in front of the American attack vessels, Lieutenant Commander Evans plows forward trying to get within torpedo range.
He was firing his little 5-inch guns, and they were basically just bouncing off the sides of these big, huge ships that the Japanese had. But he was aiming for the bridge, and he was aiming for the decks and so forth.
Finally in range, Evans unleashes a torpedo at the Japanese heavy cruiser Kumano. The torpedo courses through the sea, and minutes later,
blew the bow right off the front of a Japanese cruiser.
Soon, the Japanese cruiser Suzuya stops to assist the wounded Kumano.
He fired another torpedo, and he also hit and sunk that ship.
Amid the heavy gunfire, torpedo attacks, and the hundreds of planes harassing them, Admiral Kurita and his commanders are bewildered.
The Japanese are thrown into confusion. They believe that they are being attacked by more powerful forces than they are. You start seeing Japanese cruisers getting knocked out. The Japanese battleships are taking damage to their topsides. It makes it very difficult for the Japanese to fight a coherent action against the Americans. They're constantly maneuvering to avoid air attacks, which in turn makes it difficult to direct the gunfire against the American jeep carriers.
Like a bear under attack by a swarm of bees, the Japanese center force falters.
Where they thought that they had a mismatch, and they really did in terms of raw material terms, they're unable to close with the Americans. They're increasingly harassed by American air power. And eventually, the Japanese admiral decides that he's had enough and he leaves.
They said, the hell with this. They turned around and they hightailed it out of there.
They could have sunk every ship that was there, but somehow the admiral there gave orders They're around, they're headed for home.
Which is a stunning reversal, and from the Americans' perspective, a sudden deliverance that they had not expected that they were going to receive.
Unfortunately, Lieutenant Commander Ernest Evans, the bold instigator of the American charge, doesn't survive the battle. Before the center force withdraws, Japanese destroyers close in on Evans's vessel and riddle it with gunfire. The USS Johnston sinks, and Lieutenant Commander Evans is never seen again. The Battle of Leyte Gulf has ended in utter disaster for the Japanese Navy. The Japanese losses at Leyte include 4 aircraft carriers, 3 battleships, 10 cruisers, 11 destroyers, and nearly 14,000 sailors and air crewmen. American losses, by contrast, are relatively light. 1 light aircraft carrier, 2 escort carriers, 2 destroyers, 2 destroyer escorts, and 1,500 sailors and air crewmen.
This really marks the final demise of the Japanese Navy, and they'll never really be able to do anything of a concerted nature to repel any further attacks by the U.S. Navy at this point. It really is the end of an era.
The U.S. Navy has now eclipsed the force that started a mode of warfare, carrier warfare, whose supreme potential no one had recognized before December 7th, 1941.
No one knew how carriers were supposed to operate. Pearl Harbor really was the initial battle that sort of announced the beginning of the carrier age warfare. Leyte is the battle that announces that there's only one Navy in the world that is really capable of doing that sort of warfare, and it's the U.S. Navy.
The Battle of Leyte Gulf has another preeminent distinction. It is the largest naval confrontation in the history of mankind.
A naval battle beyond comprehension in terms of its overall scale and size. And right there in the middle of it is the aircraft carrier USS Enterprise. That ship, which early in the war was there to hold the line against the Japanese. The same ship that, for a while, was the only aircraft carrier we had in the Pacific.
USS Enterprise is the only American carrier to have engaged all 3 of the Japanese attack forces. And for one Enterprise pilot, the struggle at Leyte lasts a few days longer than it does for his fellow flyers. Commander Fred Backetus, the Enterprise Hellcat pilot shot down in the Sulu Sea on the morning of the 24th, remains adrift for 6 more days.
In the middle of the night, Backetus is asleep. He wakes up to the sound of diesel engines. It's a very chilling experience. Could be the Japanese fleet, could be an enemy picket boat or a Japanese destroyer. In a moment, he could be taken aboard, taken prisoner. Turns out, it's the USS Hardhead. It's an American submarine, and has come to his rescue.
USS Hardhead later transfers Backetus to another sub headed for Perth, Australia. From there, Backetus flies back to Pearl Harbor and eventually rejoins his squadron. The Navy needs fighter pilots like Backetus. The war is drawing to a close. And with the loss of their carrier forces, the Japanese must now resort to launching suicide attacks from land bases. The kamikaze will present the gravest threat to the U.S. Navy of the entire war. And for USS Enterprise, the kamikaze, the divine wind, will mean catastrophe.